I should probably admit something before I tell you the rest. When Rachel Bennett knocked on my door at 6:45 that morning, I almost pretended I wasn't home. 3 firm knocks, not polite, not hesitant. The kind that says someone has already made a decision. I was standing in my kitchen holding the same blue coffee mug I've used for 8 years. My house was quiet the way it always is at that hour. Radio humming low, pine floors creaking when I shift my weight, and for one ridiculous second, I knew it was her. That didn't make sense, of course. Nobody comes looking for a 62-year-old widower at dawn unless something is wrong, or unless you said something the night before that you shouldn't have. My name is David Marshall. I live alone outside Asheville, North Carolina. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 1 small workshop out back that smells like varnish and cedar. After my wife Karen died 12 years ago, I learned a kind of math nobody talks about. 1 plate, 1 towel, 1 set of footsteps in the hallway. You keep things simple because simple doesn't leave. The night before that knock, I broke that rule without realizing it. Rachel Bennett had been standing in my driveway under the porch light when I came home from the lumberyard. You probably know the type of woman. I mean, calm, composed. The kind who walks into a room and everyone pays attention even if she doesn't ask them to. Around town, she's the real estate agent with the downtown office. But that night, something about her looked different, tired, like someone who had been holding herself together for too long. "My apartment feels empty tonight," she said quietly. And instead of saying the safe thing, the polite thing, I smiled and said something careless. "Well," I told her, half joking, "I've got a guest room collecting dust if it ever gets too quiet over there." She blinked at me like I had said something serious. Then she thanked me and drove away. I locked my door that night, assuming the moment would disappear by morning. But when I opened the door after those 3 knocks, Rachel was standing there with a small rolling suitcase. And the first words out of her mouth were soft. "Is your offer still on?" For a moment, I honestly thought she was joking. Not smiling, not laughing, just testing the air. Rachel stood there on my porch with one hand resting on the suitcase, handle like it had grown there. The early morning light behind her made everything feel unreal, like a memory I hadn't lived yet. "Rachel," I said slowly, rubbing the back of my neck. "About that." I was kidding. She nodded once, almost immediately. I figured. But she didn't move. That's when I noticed her hand on the suitcase handle. Her knuckles were pale, the grip tighter than someone holding luggage should ever need. People don't show up at dawn with a suitcase because of a joke. They show up because they've run out of somewhere else to go. "You don't have to feel obligated," she added quietly. "I can still leave." The strange thing is, she sounded calm, too calm, like she had already prepared herself for the answer I was supposed to give, and my brain immediately started doing the sensible math. "You are 62 years old. You live alone for a reason. You barely know this woman. Say no. Close the door. Protect the quiet life you've spent 12 years building." But standing there in the doorway, I noticed something small. Rachel Bennett, the composed, always perfect Rachel Bennett, everyone in Asheville knew, looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Not messy, not dramatic, just worn thin, like someone who had been strong for too long. Behind me, down the hallway, the guest room door sat closed, clean, unused, almost untouched since Karen died. A museum of a life I stopped living. My hand tightened on the doorframe. I could hear the voice of common sense whispering in my head, "Don't invite complication into a quiet life." But another thought slipped in behind it, a quieter one. What if the quiet isn't the same thing as living? I stepped back from the door. "Come in," I said. The suitcase wheels bumped once over the threshold, and that ordinary sound felt like something in my life had just shifted. Rachel stepped inside carefully. Then she looked at me and asked a question I wasn't ready for. "Are you sure this doesn't scare you?" Her question caught me off guard. "Are you sure this doesn't scare you?" Most people would have laughed that off. I didn't, because the honest answer was yes. Terrified might have been a better word. But instead of saying that, I shrugged and closed the door behind her. "I've handled worse things than a guest," I said. The moment the words left my mouth, I realized how strange they sounded. Rachel didn't comment. She just rolled the suitcase a few feet inside and stopped, like she was waiting for instructions in someone else's house, which technically she was. The silence stretched between us in that awkward way 2 people get when they both know. Something important just happened, but nobody knows how to acknowledge it. "So, coffee?" I finally asked. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "That would be nice." I walked into the kitchen, trying to pretend nothing about this morning was unusual. But the cabinet door froze halfway open in my hand. Because there was only one mug on the front shelf. The blue one, my mug, that had been the rule for 12 years. One mug meant one person lived here. Simple, predictable, safe. I reached to the back of the cabinet and pushed aside a few dusty glasses until I found another one, a faded mug with a mountain scene painted on the side. Karen used to like that one. My hand hesitated before I brought it down. Rachel must have noticed something in my face, because she spoke softly from the doorway. You don't have to do that for me. It's just coffee, I said quickly. But we both knew it wasn't. The machine started brewing with its usual loud gurgle. Rachel leaned lightly against the counter, watching the kitchen like she was trying to memorize it without intruding. I should probably explain why I showed up, she said after a moment. You don't have to, I replied. She gave a small, tired smile. That's kind of you. But it wouldn't be fair. The coffee finished brewing. I poured the first mug without thinking. Then I picked up the second one, and that's when Rachel said something that made my chest tighten. They gave me 72 hours to fix a mistake I didn't make. They gave me 72 hours to fix a mistake I didn't make. Rachel said it calmly, too calmly, like someone reading a weather report instead of describing the moment their life cracked open. I set the two mugs on the table by the window. 72 hours for what? I asked. She wrapped her hands around the warm mug but didn't drink yet. My firm thinks I mishandled a property deal, she said. They want me to sign a statement taking responsibility. And you didn't? No. Her eyes lifted to mine then, steady and clear. I refused. The word hung in the kitchen like something heavier than it should have been. Most people in town would have folded. Rachel Bennett had built a reputation on being reliable, professional, composed. But something in the way she said refused told me. The story underneath wasn't simple. They think the scandal will go away if someone signs their name, she added. And that someone is you, I finished. She nodded once. Outside, a car passed slowly on the wet road. The tires hissed against the pavement. Inside my kitchen, the air felt tighter. So the suitcase, I said carefully. Rachel finally took a sip of coffee before answering. I needed a place where no one would think to look for me while I decide what to do. You think people are actually looking? Not yet, she said. But they will. Her tone didn't sound dramatic. It sounded practical, like someone who had already done the math. I leaned back in the chair, studying her in the quiet morning light. Rachel Bennett wasn't the kind of woman who ran away from problems, which meant whatever this situation was, it had pushed her further than anyone around town realized. You could have gone anywhere, I said. A hotel. A friend's house. She looked down into the coffee mug for a long second. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. I didn't want to be somewhere that expected answers. My chest tightened slightly, because suddenly her being here felt less like coincidence, and more like a choice. Rachel looked up again. Did I make a mistake coming here, David? Did I make a mistake coming here, David? The question settled in the space between us like something fragile. I should have answered quickly. Instead, I stared at the coffee in my mug like it might offer advice, because the truth was complicated. Part of me wanted to say yes, not because Rachel had done anything wrong, but because letting someone into a quiet life like mine is dangerous. You spend years building walls after loss, and the moment someone kind stands inside those walls, you realize how easy it would be to lose everything again. You didn't make a mistake, I finally said. But the words sounded cautious even to me. Rachel noticed. She always seemed to notice the things people tried to hide. That wasn't a confident answer, she said softly. I gave a small smile. Confidence and honesty don't always live in the same house. For a second, something in her expression softened. Not flirtation, not relief. Something quieter than that. Understanding. We finished our coffee without rushing. Outside, Asheville moved through another gray morning like nothing unusual had happened. But inside my kitchen, the air felt different. Like two strangers were carefully deciding how much of themselves to reveal. After a while, Rachel stood. I should probably unpack a little, she said. If that's still okay. The way she said if made it clear she was still waiting for permission. That's what the room is for, I replied. She nodded and rolled the suitcase down the hallway. I watched her disappear into the guest room, the same room that had stayed untouched for years. The door closed gently, and suddenly the house felt smaller. Not crowded, just aware. Later that afternoon, I left for my shift at the lumberyard. Normally, the quiet house never bothered me, but as I grabbed my keys, something strange crossed my mind. For the first time in 12 years, someone would still be there when I came home. That realization should have felt comforting. Instead, it made my chest tighten. Because the real danger wasn't Rachel staying in my house. It was how quickly I was starting to wonder what it would feel like if she left. The whole day at the lumberyard felt wrong, Not bad, just unfamiliar. For 12 years, my routine had been simple. Wake up, work a few hours, come home to a quiet house that never surprised me. But that afternoon, every time someone said, "See you tomorrow, Dave," a strange thought followed it. Someone is already in your house, not a guest passing through. A person with a story I didn't fully understand. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sky over Asheville had turned that soft gray that comes before evening rain, and my heart was beating faster than it should have been. I told myself it was ridiculous. Still, I noticed something the second I opened the front door. The house smelled different. Coffee. And something warmer. Toast, maybe. Rachel was standing at the sink with her sleeves rolled up, rinsing a plate. She looked over her shoulder when she heard the door. "Oh, hi," she said, a little surprised. "I hope it's okay. I made lunch earlier." For a moment I just stood there, because the scene felt strangely normal. Too normal. Like she had always been there. "It's fine," I said quickly. My voice sounded sharper than I meant it to. Rachel paused slightly, then finished rinsing the dish. "I didn't want to sit around doing nothing," she added. "I understand." But inside my head something else was happening. Those were my dishes. My sink. My quiet little routines that had stayed untouched for years. Grief does strange things to a person. You can't control what you lost. So you start controlling everything else. I cleared my throat and hung my jacket on the chair. "Long day?" Rachel asked. "Not really." She nodded, sensing the tension but not pushing it. That was the thing about Rachel. She didn't fill silence just to escape it. Instead, she leaned lightly against the counter, studying me with that calm expression of hers. Then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "You're trying very hard to pretend I'm temporary." I froze, because the worst part was, she wasn't wrong. "You're trying very hard to pretend I'm temporary." Rachel didn't say it accusingly. If anything, she sounded curious, like she was studying a puzzle she had already half solved. I leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing my arms in a way that probably looked more defensive than I intended. "That wasn't the plan?" I asked lightly. Her eyebrow lifted a fraction. "You invited me in." "I offered a guest room," I corrected. Rachel tilted her head slightly, the way people do when they're deciding whether honesty will make things better or worse. "David, you didn't offer a hotel recommendation." I almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, I reached for a glass of water I didn't really want. The kitchen felt smaller now. The quiet between us heavier than it had been that morning. Rachel watched me carefully. "You don't trust this situation," she said. "That's a polite way to say it." "And the impolite way?" I met her eyes. "I don't trust how quickly things can change." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Rachel looked down at the counter, tracing the rim of her coffee mug with one finger. "You loved her very much," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Karen's photo sat on the mantel across the room. I followed Rachel's gaze there before answering. "Yes." "How long were you married?" 31 years. She nodded slowly. "That kind of love doesn't disappear." "No," I said. "It doesn't." The strange thing was, Rachel didn't look uncomfortable hearing that. If anything, she looked thoughtful, like she respected it. "I'm not here to replace anything," she said quietly. The way she said it eased something tight in my chest, but it also created a new kind of fear, because if Rachel wasn't trying to take anything from my past, then the only thing left to worry about was the future, and futures are dangerous when you've already survived one ending. Rachel pushed away from the counter. "I'm going for a short walk," she said gently. "Give the house back to you for a while." She paused at the door. Then she added something that followed me long after she stepped outside. "You don't have to decide anything tonight, David." The door closed softly behind her. But standing there in the quiet kitchen, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't afraid she would stay. I was afraid she might leave. I did something foolish after Rachel left for that walk. I watched the clock, not in a dramatic way, just small glances every few minutes, while pretending to straighten things that were already straight. The chair at the table, the stack of mail by the door. Old habits. Control the little things so the bigger feelings don't show. 20 minutes passed, then 30, and somewhere around the 40-minute mark, a thought slipped in that made my stomach tighten. What if she doesn't come back? It was ridiculous. Rachel Bennett was staying in my guest room. Her suitcase was still there, but the house already felt quieter, emptier, like something warm had stepped outside and taken the air with it. I finally walked onto the porch just as the sky over. Asheville started darkening with rain, and that's when I saw her. Rachel was standing halfway down the driveway, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was calm, but tight. "No," she said firmly. "I told you already. I'm not signing that." A pause. Her shoulders stiffened. I understand the pressure, she continued. But that doesn't change the truth. Another pause. Then something in her tone shifted. Not anger. Something colder. If you need a scapegoat, you'll have to find someone else. The word hung in the evening air like a crack of thunder. Rachel ended the call and lowered the phone slowly. She hadn't noticed me yet. For a moment, she just stood there staring at the wet road, like someone calculating the cost of a decision. Then she looked up. Our eyes met across the yard. Rachel walked toward the porch. Her expression composed again, but the calm looked thinner now. They're pushing harder, she said quietly. I nodded. I figured. She hesitated on the steps. Then she asked something that caught me completely unprepared. If this gets uglier, do you still want me here? It wasn't about the guest room anymore. It was about whether I was willing to stand beside her. When things stopped being easy, and standing there on that porch, I realized my answer would change more than just tonight. If this gets uglier, do you still want me here? The rain had started by then. Soft at first, just a quiet tapping on the porch roof. I should have answered right away, but the truth was, I was thinking about my daughter, about the quiet life I had rebuilt piece by piece after Karen died, about how easily complicated situations can swallow a peaceful routine. Rachel must have seen the hesitation in my face. She nodded slowly. That's okay, she said. You don't have to explain. But something about that sentence hit harder than it should have, because she wasn't angry. She was preparing to leave, and suddenly I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. Rachel wasn't the kind of person who stayed where she wasn't clearly wanted. Wait, I said. She paused on the step. I didn't say no. Rachel studied me carefully. You also didn't say yes. She was right. So I took a slow breath and said the thing that had been sitting in my chest all evening. You should know something before you decide whether staying here is a good idea. Her expression sharpened slightly. What kind of something? I leaned against the porch railing. The lumberyard isn't the only place I work. Rachel blinked once, clearly not expecting that. For the last 8 years, I continued quietly. I've been doing property inspections for the county. Quiet work. Mostly paperwork. Her eyes narrowed slightly. And the deal your firm is blaming you for? The rain grew heavier around us. I inspected that property 3 weeks ago. Rachel's breath caught. You're telling me you've seen the documents? Yes. And? I met her eyes. And the problem they're blaming on you didn't exist when I signed off on it. The silence that followed felt electric. Rachel's entire posture changed. Not relief. Shock. David, she said slowly. If what you're saying is true, it is. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Then someone changed the records after the inspection, which meant the situation she was running from wasn't just unfair, it was deliberate. And now both of us were standing in the middle of it. Rachel stared at me like the ground had shifted under her feet. You're sure? She asked. Rain fell harder now, drumming steadily against the porch roof. I'm sure, I said. I remember that inspection clearly. For a moment she didn't speak. Rachel Bennett was a woman who always seemed in control, always a few steps ahead of whatever problem came next. But right then, she looked shaken, not weak, just human. They changed the records, she murmured slowly, thinking out loud. Which means they needed someone to take the fall before anyone noticed. And you were the easiest name to attach to it, I said. She let out a quiet breath and leaned back against the porch railing beside me. The rain blurred the streetlights at the end of the road, turning everything soft and distant. You realize what this means, she said after a moment. Yeah. It means if I fight this, it's going to get loud, I figured. Rachel turned her head slightly, studying my face. You didn't have to tell me any of that. I know. You could have stayed out of it. That would have been easier. She smiled faintly. But you didn't. No. The truth was simple. I had spent 12 years avoiding risk, avoiding attachment, avoiding anything that could break again. But standing there beside Rachel in the rain, I realized something that surprised me. Some risks feel different. Some risks feel alive. Rachel looked back out at the dark road. So, she said quietly, if this turns into a fight, you're part of it now. I nodded. I guess I am. She didn't say thank you. Instead, she asked something softer. Does that scare you? I thought about it for a second. Then I smiled slightly. Honestly, I said, I was joking when I offered that guest room. Rachel laughed quietly. Then she leaned her shoulder against mine as we stood there listening to the rain. But I added after a moment, I'm not joking anymore.